You are listening to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer and aspiring software architect.
And I'm Beej, the advancing journeyman developer.
Complete Developer Podcast is supported by listeners like you. We are now on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Complete Developer Podcast.
Hello, DevSpace Huntsville! We're here at DevSpace talking with Ed Charbeneau of the Eat, Sleep, Code podcast about predicting the future of technology by looking at the industry of tech. We'll delve into the science fiction of the 1950s to look at what they predicted compared to what we have now. From there, we'll discuss what to expect in the future based on those past predictions. Now, we originally recorded this at DevSpace, but since it was lunchtime, the noise level was a bit too loud, and Ed was really kind enough to let us record again and spend another hour or so with us geeking out. Before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I have been recovering from surgery. I had a inguinal hernia surgery this past Wednesday, and I've pretty much been laid up since then. Like, today was the first day that I went back to work, and I say that in air quotes because I actually worked from home. Just a lot of pain, and it's been kind of a slow recovery. I mean, it's supposed to be. That's pretty much all I've been doing. I've been watching everybody else actually get to have a life. That's about it.
I can tell because your voice is kind of scratchy and stuff. Like, that you haven't been doing much because that's usually what happens.
Yeah, and I have a ice pack on me right now as we're recording because I'm still in quite a bit of pain. So,
and by ice pack he means frozen peas.
Yeah.
Literally. So Ed, how about you?
So I'm trying to get things back in order from a busy trip. I was recently at DevSpace with you guys, and then as soon as DevSpace was over, I headed straight up I-70 to St. Louis, Missouri, actually a little bit outside in St. Charles for another conference called Dev Up, which is formerly the St. Louis Days of .NET, another amazing conference. And I stayed there for a few days, and now I'm getting prepared for yet another conference, this time in Sofia, Bulgaria, in a couple weeks. So I'm getting all prepped up for that, and that one's called Dev Reach. So I've been to Dev-Space, Dev Up, and Dev Reach, and after that I think it's Dev Giving and Devmas or something like that, right?
Nice. Bulgaria, I'm kind of jealous of that. I haven't gotten to go to any out-of-country conferences yet, so that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm fortunate if I'm speaking at the conference, and it's a beautiful country, and Sofia, the city we're going to be in, has a lot of really cool, rich history, so it'll be an exciting trip and round out the end of my travels for the year.
That's really awesome. So I kind of understand the busyness. My life has been a bit insane lately too. Yesterday was the first day in probably a month or so that I haven't had to do anything or be anywhere. And I actually skipped out on our writing group to take the day off and sleep in. So this week, getting ready to speak at a local boot camp here. It's brand new, called Covalence, and I'm going to be going in there talking. I think I'm going to talk on logging. I haven't decided exactly which talk I'm going to give, but they asked for a more technical one, so that's kind of the direction I'm leaning. Since DevSpace, I have attended another conference as well, Bar Camp, here in Nashville this past weekend. The Junior Developer Toolbox crew, our other sibling podcast, we're all there. Even Jason drove up from Atlanta to attend his first tech conference. We all got to participate in the podcast lounge, which was a really neat idea where we did short interviews for the Bar Camp podcast. Now, just as DevSpace was Will's first time speaking at a conference, Bar Camp was my first time speaking at a tech conference. It's a little bit different as the speakers are chosen by popular vote the day of the conference, or they call it an unconference in air quotes. So we didn't actually know who was going to be speaking or when we'd be speaking until that day. Thankfully, my talk was rather popular, as by the time I finished, there was standing room only in the room, so that was really cool. But speaking of bar camp, they had a really unique use of technology that I'm going to tell y'all all about in IoTs. At bar camp this year, each person's badge had a unique QR code on it that, when scanned by your smartphone, would take you to a voting page. On that page, you were able to vote for the sessions that you wanted to be available at the, quote, unconference. It was a really neat idea. I was able to talk to one of the organizers, John Robinson, about it, and he told me that the sessions are always chosen by popular vote. Over the years, they've had several different ways of assessing the vote. And the great thing about using the QR codes on the badge is that only attendees actually at the conference get to vote on sessions. It's really neat. While it's not exactly IoT, it is kind of a unique use of technology that I wanted to share with you guys because I thought it was really cool. So, Will, who's talking to us this week?
Well, we grabbed a tweet from Dennis Stepp, who is at DevSpace. He says, sporting my newest koozie from @CompleteDevPod, holding @Horny Goat Brew Company Salted Caramel Brown Ale. It's apparently a hipster developer Monday.
Dennis, we're glad you are enjoying your koozie. We had a little conversation with him on Twitter after posting this, and he said that the beer rated about a 4 out of 5. So we're going to have to try it out. Tonight, I should say I'm drinking because Will is on pain medicine and not drinking anything. At least he shouldn't be. I'll fuss at him if he is. I'm drinking Tennessee Brew Works State Park Blonde Ale. Now, what's really unique about the beer that I'm drinking is it is actually funded by the state of Tennessee. But hey, Dennis, send us a message with your contact information because we've got a Complete Developer water bottle just for you. Guys, if you'd like your very own Complete Developer water bottle, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We post all of our episodes to Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. We're also on Path and Tumblr. And as of last night, at the encouragement of our Junior Developer Toolbox friends, we have an Instagram. So you can check out Complete Developer Podcast on Instagram and all the goofy photos that I'm going to post because Will won't post any.
Yep.
So, Ed is a Microsoft MVP and an international speaker, writer, online influencer, a developer advocate for progress, and expert on all things web development. Ed enjoys geeking out to cool new tech, brainstorming about future technology, and admiring great design. So, Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, thanks for taking time again to join us. The first question that I like to ask all of our guests is, what got you into development and technology?
So, as a lot of us developers, that at least in my travels, I've met quite a few. I've always been excited about video games and technology. And I played video games ever since I was a little kid and could pick up an Atari controller. And as I got older, I started playing games on the PC, things like Doom and Wolfenstein and stuff like that, and ended up making levels for Doom and Counter-Strike and other games, and got into some programming stuff through those games and tools. And I went to school for electronics engineering and got a degree in electronics. I thought that was something I would enjoy. Turned out it was more of a hobby than a passion. So I started using my degree to work at a defense contractor, and I was working in an EEPROM programming department. It was just really super antiquated type of a process. So what I ended up doing is writing a piece of software that pretty much put myself out of a job. And my boss was like, this is really cool. Can you do it for this other department? So I went to another department and wrote another app and put myself out of a job again. And I just kept doing that over and over until eventually I became a software developer. And now I'm working at Progress as a developer advocate. So I get to build a lot of cool things with with new technology and go to conferences and talk about it and host a podcast and do a lot of other fun stuff.
That's really awesome. Quick question. Have you played the new Wolfenstein?
I have not. That's the sad part about how all this came about is I used to be really bananas over video games. And now that I'm a full-time, technology software guy, I don't have time to play many video games. So I still play some old Counter-Strike here and there, but that's about it.
I remember I used to get in a lot of trouble in high school because all I wanted to do was sit and play video games in class when I was bored, and they kept blocking them, so I would get in trouble for hacking the school's computer systems to get to the video games. I don't know who kept putting them or left them on there. I think it was our sysadmin, because I think he liked playing them. So, before we get into the fun stuff, tell us a little bit about the podcast you host and what you do there.
So I work for a company called Progress, and developers may know us a little bit better as Telerik. We build the UI components like Kendo UI and the UI for ASP.NET MVC and those type of things. And one of the really cool things I get to do as part of my job is host a podcast. And it's unlike what most might think, it's about Telerik products 24/7, and actually it's not. We have a really good community outreach program in our developer advocacy group, and we're allowed to do some really interesting passion projects, things that interest us as developers. We get to take into the community and kind of build a community alongside of us. And one of the things I'm able to do is host this podcast. And I travel quite a bit, and I go to a lot of conferences, and I meet a lot of amazing speakers. Some speakers, like yourselves, first time ever speaking, they have some really great things to talk about. And then some are, industry vets that you may have heard speaking all over the circuits. And I get to interview those folks. I do about 2 interviews a month, and we talk about anything software development related. So whether it's soft skills or web development, mobile development, HoloLens, IoT, you name it, I get to talk about those things. And I'm really fortunate to have a company that supports the community the way they do.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds just fascinating. I really want to listen to that because right up my alley of things that I would enjoy. So
the podcast has been going on for about 2 years. It's called Eat, Sleep, Code, and you can find us on SoundCloud, and you can also find us syndicated on Channel 9.
Okay. We'll definitely check that out, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes for you guys. Jumping on into the fun stuff, because we had this conversation at DevSpace, and it was a lot of fun with a lot of fascinating things in it. You have this whole talk that you give about predicting the future from the past. Kind of what's a quick overview of how that works?
So I'm a big fan of sci-fi. Most of us geeks are, maybe speaking for the crowd here, but I've always been interested in sci-fi stories and things like comic books and goofy, geeky TV shows, and I really enjoy The Twilight Zone. It's, one of those shows that's based in the sci-fi realm, and it's from the 1950s and 60s. And I'm also kind of a history nerd, and I like to look into various parts of technological history and see what the technology was like in those eras and how that relates to what we have today. And when you do that, you can start drawing these parallels between what the technology gap was between the 50s and today, and what those technologies might produce, between today and 50 years from now. So this is kind of a talk that came out of a lot of research of looking into the past and seeing what all those technologies and things were and how they came about, and kind of the growing pains along with it.
I like some old sci-fi too.
Same here.
So I'm a big Doctor Who fan, which Will makes fun of me for. So,
well, the really cool thing about the Twilight Zone is the era that it was in. So, in the 1950s, late 50s, and early 60s, we were in this era of like space exploration, which is really cool because we were just at the DevSpace conference, so it's really relatable. But you had the space race going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and they were trying to get a person into space and land people on the moon and these sorts of things. Other things that are happening at the time were the first nuclear power plants were coming online. So like here you have this era where a lot of things that were typically science fiction were becoming reality. Putting a man in space, harnessing the atom, and stuff like that. And when you look back at the 1950s, I like to call it when the future still looked futuristic. Like if you look at cars and toys and stuff from back then, they had this really futuristic vibe to them. And you kind of don't have that feeling with futurism anymore. It was kind of special back then because you had this space flight scenario and like they were putting wings on everything. Like even the cars had like these really cool tail fins and stuff. And it was just a really neat time to look back upon.
So, given that, what technologies do you think will affect our futures the most?
So there's three technologies that I believe will have a lot of influence in what we do in the future. And I feel like big data, artificial intelligence, and augmented reality are three of the main technologies that we're really going to have to focus on. If we don't, we're going to lose sight of that as developers, and we're not going to be at the leading edge of the people in our industry. And another thing that kind of goes along with all this, and I'm going to go back and forth with this Twilight Zone thing because it really plays into all of this really well, is the Twilight Zone, it helps us set up a frame of reference for time. But there was also another interesting part of the show is, even though it was this sci-fi show and it had a lot to do with technology, the actual underlying theme of the show was this human condition. So I'll give you an example of that. One episode, there was this guy that was exiled to a planet in space, and he was all alone on this planet, and there was like a warden that came out, and the warden had this feeling that this guy was innocent. So the warden felt bad for him being alone, and he brought him this android companion, and it looked lifelike. It was a female, and it was there to keep him company. And as the episode progresses, they finally acquit this guy of his crimes. And the dilemma that he has is at the end of the show, he has to decide whether he wants to return back to Earth and leave his companion behind or stay exiled with this computer android companion. All right, so he knows it's not human, so he has to make this decision if he wants to stay alone with basically a robot for the rest of his life or return home. So that's that human condition that we're going to have to deal with these three technologies. And with that episode, I can't remember the name of the robot companion, but for simplicity's sake, we'll call her Alexa. I think that sounds pretty relatable.
Yeah.
He ended up actually just destroying this android and returning home. He had feelings for this android and stuff like that, and it was kind of this human emotion like tied to this fake human-like device. I'm not quite sure why he destroyed the android instead of just leaving her there alone. I'm not sure if he felt like she would have these emotional feelings of being left alone, or maybe he just felt like he didn't want people finding his browser history.
Well, I mean, it was a 2-year upgrade cycle. It's like typical Android.
the new model was out.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's sort of what I was about to ask was, did the android start having feelings for him?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was very lifelike, and it was enough to where he got emotionally attached to it. And I think we're going to see a lot of these things that people might consider creepy coming out of these different technologies, especially the artificial intelligence realm. And we're going to have to deal with these things on a instance by instance basis as people, and try to figure out where the line has to be drawn, where it's not creepy, or what the benefit is to having these creepy technologies in our lives.
Get past the uncanny valley, basically.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of different uncanny valley-like things that we're going to run into.
Okay, well, what do you mean by that? What kind of different uncanny valleys are you seeing, or do you think we will have to deal with in the future?
So just as a kind of a brief overview of like a few things, we're going to have to decide on how we like our data used and who has permission to use it. We're seeing some of these things happen right now with anonymous data and companies that sell it to each other. That's going to be one type of human emotion or human condition that we have to deal with is how people use our data. Another thing is how we deal with technologies that persist our personalities. And we see this with Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts for people that have deceased and things like that. Already today, those are issues that we have to deal with. And, there's another issue of devices and their interruption in our lives. So we have things like phones right now where we're on our phones and maybe that's socially acceptable in some situations but not others. And eventually we're going to have more devices than just our phones. Some of these are going to be strapped to our face. We kind of saw some of this happen with the Google Glass and people being called glass holes and stuff like that. So there's all these various human factors that come into play, and we can talk a little bit more in depth about those as we go along.
When you mentioned that, I was thinking about Will and I had a friend that passed away just this past April. It was rough. He was the same age as us, and his mom went and shut down all the social media and stuff like that. And apparently she didn't do the Facebook correctly. I don't know if she was supposed to contact them and tell them, but she just deactivated the account. And then some upgrade reactivated his account and freaked her out. She called me all in a huff asking if I was the one that had reactivated his account. And we eventually figured out that it was an update to Facebook. She left it up as a tribute to him, but it was a big to-do, caused a lot of stress for her and a lot of the members of his family. You remember when that happened, right, Will?
Yeah. It's been, a month or two, I think?
No, it's October now. That was back in June when that actually happened.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences and things that happen like that make us uncomfortable. And I think that type of thing it's going to get better and worse at the same time. And by that I mean, there's going to be an effort to try to fix those things, but at the same time, we're going to create more unintended consequences with the different technologies and the fact that they're getting more advanced, and we're going to see a lot of these kind of awkward things, pop up and make people uncomfortable and have to deal with those.
Yeah, I will say this on Facebook's behalf. They were really polite about it. We had the same thing with Patreon. He was one of our first supporters of the podcast, and one of the first people to jump on Patreon and start donating to us to help, with the cost of podcasting. And I had to get in touch with them at Patreon because they didn't have a way of, I guess the way that they had for you to remove someone was to block them. And I was like, personally was not comfortable doing that. And so I emailed them and said, hey, this is what's going on. It's telling me I have to block him to where it'll stop trying to bill him. And I don't feel comfortable doing that. And so they were really great about it. They're like, we're sorry. We'll take care of this. Sorry for your loss. Super great interaction with them. I was really impressed with the way they handled the whole situation. So, but I did want to kind of circle back around. You'd mentioned the three big areas of technology being big data, artificial intelligence, and augmented reality. And so we kind of got on a little bit of a rabbit hole there about the human condition. And I want to continue talking about that, but I also want to hit on these areas that are going to affect our futures a lot by talking about their histories. So could you give us a little information about the history behind data storage or big data?
Sure. So first of all, big data, what exactly is big data? And, that's the ability for us to store and examine really large data sets. And a lot of times these things, these data sets are used to to relate things with this human behavior in our interactions. And, all these technologies about data storage started out of, the 1950s and 60s with the beginning of computing. And, for example, in 1961, if you wanted a hard disk storage for your computing, this hard disk drive would be about 52 inches tall and about 70 inches wide. And the platters were about 39 inches in diameter. So these were huge pieces of equipment, and they were so powerful that they actually had to be bolted to the floor into concrete. And the reason for that was these platters were so large, if you started spinning those platters, the centrifugal force would just knock the machine over. So they had to be screwed in tight. They were huge. A machine with several of these platters could only store like a maximum of about 200 megabytes of data. And that's, if you've got a really good machine. So if you were able to put together a gigabyte of data back then, it would have cost you something like $3.6 million per gigabyte. So, kind of abstract what that was like in the past. 1960, that's roughly 60 years ago to what we have today. And I believe like the latest data storage technology that's consumer available now is something like 60 terabytes on a hard drive. I think Seagate puts that out. It's about 60 terabytes on a solid state drive, and it measures 3.5 inches instead of several feet.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as like a gigabyte storage, I mean, you're gonna have a hard time even finding that now. Like that's too small. Like it's not commercially viable.
Yeah, my mom's laptop has one.
Well, yeah.
So if you price that out, though, comparing it to if you were able to accumulate a gigabyte of data in 1961, would have cost you $3.6 million per gigabyte. Now that storage costs you about 3 cents per gigabyte. So, I mean, that's a huge jump in technology, especially in the terms of cost and storage size. I mean, it's at a level that's exponential. So, there's a human condition behind this as well, right? We talked about these human conditions, and one of those things is the more space that we create, the more space we tend to fill, right? How many of you guys have like a shelf or something in the house, and tell me if you have an empty shelf somewhere?
Yeah,
everybody.
I'm thinking you got half an empty shelf in here, Will.
Oh, I do? Well,
yeah,
put stuff on it.
Yeah, so
I think it's half empty because you've moved stuff.
Yeah, there's stuff in the floor that needs to be put up there, though. No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have this tendency, like, if we put up a shelf in the garage or something, we're like, okay, we need to put something on there. Our tools can go here, or whatever can go there. We put a shelf up in the house. It's like, okay, we can put some picture frames here, and those pictures obviously have to have pictures inside of them. And then, we end up filling up that shelf, and then we fill up our walls. We have to kind of fill the space, and less is more a lot of times, but it's not something that you see really happen in the wild too much. I know around our place, I've hung plenty of stuff in all of our living spaces, and it's kind of a routine around here. So the more space we create, the more space we tend to fill, and it's something that we do digitally as well as we do physically. And there's estimates that are being done, and I think we've estimated that we're going to store by the year 2020 about 40 zettabytes of data. And 40 zettabytes of data, that's equivalent to 125 million years of video, right? So that's a lot of Twilight Zone episodes.
So what are we doing with all that data? I mean, that's...
Yes, following that human condition, right, we tend to try to fill, and what we're doing is we're creating all of this data out of, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Everything we create is being saved somewhere. And then we're also uploading a lot of sensor data as well. So we have wearable sensor data, IoT, phone data. There's pretty much an infinite list of things that we're adding to this collection of data. And if you want to think about how we're going to utilize the data that we collect and why we store all of this stuff, we can go back in time even further. So if we go back, we're talking about 1961. If we rewind even further and go back like another 100 years into the 1800s, we had this incident. There was a cholera outbreak in 1854. I know when I say this, everybody's minds are going to go to Game of Thrones, but there was a scientist by the name of Jon Snow. I know, right? I gave this talk. I'm not a Game of Thrones watcher. It doesn't mean I don't like it. I just haven't got to see it yet. So don't beat me up if I'm not saying I don't like the show. I just haven't had the opportunity to watch it.
That's all right. I don't watch it either, and they make fun of me for it. So.
So I'm at a conference and I'm giving this talk about Jon Snow, and all these people are laughing, and I'm like, why is this so funny? This is a serious thing. We're talking about a cholera outbreak in 1854, and people are laughing. And then after the conference, I put two and two together and figured out, oh, there's a character on this show. Yeah, I should know better. I'm a geek. I should know better, right?
Yeah.
So Jon Snow, he was regarded as the founding father of epidemiology, or the study of patterns and causes that affect disease and health. So what he did is there was this outbreak of cholera, and back then they didn't know what exactly was causing it, and they had this thing called the bad air theory. And their theory back then was that the smell of decay and human waste and things like that were causing this foul smell in the air. And this foul smell would make you sick, and in turn make you die. So they weren't aware of germ theory and stuff like that yet. And Jon Snow, he kind of had this idea that was wrong, but he didn't quite know what exactly was the cause. He just thought it wasn't the bad air theory. He wasn't subscribing to that. So he set out to prove this wrong. So what he did is he took a map, and he had this map, and he put it on a clipboard, and he walked around town, and he knocked on doors and collected data about who had passed in those places. So he would take his clipboard and he'd knock on the door and get a kind of a body count, and he'd put like a hash mark on each location on the map. And when he did this, he started to notice a pattern on his map. And there was a brewery down the street where there were no cases of this cholera outbreak or no death. And on the other side of town, there was a water pump, and the closer you got to the water pump, the more people were affected by this. So just using simple deduction, he was able to figure out, okay, it has something to do with the water, because the people near the water are getting sick, while the people at the brewery that drink beer all day, they aren't getting sick. So you could see data being used to kind of figure out these type of problems.
Beer protects from cholera. That's what I'm hearing.
Beer is healthy to drink, at least in 1854.
Yeah.
Sounds good enough to me.
Well, Jon Snow would do nothing, and then he knew beer was good for you.
There you go. So what he wasn't able to do is exactly determine what was causing the outbreak as far as like germ theory and come up with all that on his own. But what he was able to do is kind of turn the tide against this bad air theory, and then people could put more research into finding out what the actual real problem was. Mm-hmm. And I think they did a study on this many years later, and they determined what they theorized anyway. What happened is somebody put a dirty diaper into the water supply that was infected with cholera, and then they were pumping this water back into their homes and using it. So he kind of led to this this study, though, of epidemiology and looking at these problems and tracking diseases and trying to figure this stuff out. So if we fast forward to today, what we're doing today with our data is very much the same. So those cell phone records that we mentioned much earlier, the cell phone records are actually very helpful in doing something similar. And there's researchers at Harvard that are taking cell phone records, and they're using all of this data that's being collected by our cell phones, especially in Africa. And what Africa has had is this cholera outbreak, ironically. Something that we're fighting a couple hundred years ago is still a problem today. And they're using this cell phone data to try to predict where outbreaks like cholera are going to happen. And they're able to study the movement of people and understand their migration patterns and things like that through cell phone data. That kind of gives you a grasp of, these past technologies and how they're being used today.
That is really neat. That all this talk about data has me thinking about the second technology you mentioned, which is artificial intelligence. And when are we going to have data from Star Trek? or more recently, I did just go see Blade Runner Replicants.
Nice.
So before we get into this AI discussion, let's clear up what AI actually is, right? So
okay.
we hear the term AI a lot, and we see movies, these sci-fi movies like The Terminator, or TV shows like Star Trek, where we have these very lifelike androids that can think for themselves, and kind of this sentient computer that can do anything, right? Just like we can. And the big worry is that, we'll create something that's smarter than us and faster than us and can outthink us, right? The problem is that's not what AI is. That's actually called artificial general intelligence. So you're building a general intelligence that can solve day-to-day problems just like a human being can, where AI is actually something completely different. So AI is actually kind of a top-level terminology for a lot of different computer algorithms, and it kind of encompasses many things. So within the AI realm, you have things like machine learning, which we'll talk a bit about, and we also have things like computer vision, speech recognition, translation between languages. All of these things are different forms of artificial intelligence. So again, you have this one-size-fits-all glossary term that everybody puts all of these different types of technologies into and calls AI. But it's not the thing that's going to end humankind. And we'll get a little bit more into it later, but I have a feeling that's not something we should be worried about.
All right, so you mentioned machine learning. Can you go into a little more detail there? How that applies to AI and our future?
Right, so we talked about like all this data that we're storing, right? Zettabytes of data. So how are we going to parse through zettabytes of data? Again, if we compare that to hours of video, it's something like 125 million hours of video. It's more than any one human being can consume in their lifetime. So how do we make sense of all of it, right? So what we do have inside of this artificial intelligence term is a subset of AI, which is machine learning. And machine learning is the use of, or a subfield rather, of this AI that's used to take past experiences and past data, and we run some algorithms on those to produce predictions about that data. So when a new instance of this data comes along, we can make a prediction based on it. For an example, you guys both sport some pretty nice beards, right? So there's a machine learning algorithm that Microsoft has, and it's part of their cognitive services. And what you can do is you can feed this AI lots of imagery, and from that imagery you can pick out labels or identification markers that categorize these photographs and things into something that the machine can understand. And what you can do, once you catalog all of these things, you can tell the machine to make a prediction on a new piece of information. So you can feed it lots and lots of imagery and make this big database. And you can give it a new image, and you can have it make a prediction based on that image. Now, what we would do in that loop, I guess you'd call it, is we would feed the machine this new image and then validate whether it's correct or not. And over doing that validation, we can create this algorithm that can kind of make a prediction and give us a probability on that prediction. So once we've trained the machine learning algorithm, we give it this new photograph, and it can say whether that photograph has a person in it and whether that person has a beard or not. And what it will give us along with that prediction is it'll give us a probability. So you might give it a picture and it says, yes, there's a man in the picture and he has a beard, and it's 78% probability that it's correct. So what that enables us developers to do is then say, okay, what are the thresholds of that prediction that we want to act upon? Maybe if this is something like an adult filter, it's filtering adult photographs from a user upload mechanism on our website, right? Where users can supply content. We want to make sure that there's not any adult type of data getting into the system. So it can give us the ability to say, okay, if it's over 80% probability that this is an adult photograph, we can discard it. If it's 50%, maybe we'll send an email to somebody and let them decide whether it can go up on the website or not. And then if it's less than 50%, it's in a safe range where we can allow that just to automatically be posted online. So that's how machine learning kind of operates, as it gives us these predictions and probabilities that us developers can utilize and create some really interesting programs with.
That's sort of how humans work too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very familiar to the way we operate, and of course we created it, so we kind of mirror that type of behavior in our machines as well. And what's really interesting about all this stuff that we're talking about today is that it actually originated in the 1950s.
That is really cool.
You think of all these really high-tech things that are coming out, and the ideas behind them were all just generated in that same time frame that I was talking about earlier, where we have the harnessing of the atom and computing is starting to take off. So in 1950, Alan Turing, he proposed the Turing test, which is a test to try to determine a machine's intelligence, see if it can be mistaken as a human being. And then in 1956, we had a Dartmouth conference, and this was considered the birth of AI. So 1956 is the time where AI was actually conceived, and it was at this Dartmouth conference. They got some of the biggest minds together in computer science and put them all in a room, and they hashed out a lot of these algorithms that we actually use today. Things that resulted in like reasoning as search, natural language, microworlds, things like that. Natural language is something we see a lot of. Yeah, if you've ever used Siri, this is what natural language is. This is something that came out of the 1956 Dartmouth conference. So the ideas behind Siri and Cortana and all that stuff, they're actually pretty old hat.
It's just really neat to think that some of the really cool technologies that we're seeing come about today, the things that when I was a kid I considered science fiction, were actually originally thought up when my dad was a kid.
Right.
Like it's a kind of like mind blower to think that, a generation back was when they first started talking about these ideas. When I was a kid, it was, hey, we're going to have this in the future, and now we have it.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is like, what are we talking about now that's, like our grandkids are going to have?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that could come out of this.
So I talked a little bit about not worrying about this Terminator type scenario where the computers get more advanced than us. What I do want to hit on a little bit is this notion that I'm not so worried about this artificial general intelligence that's going to take over because we have bigger fish to fry, right? We have some unintended consequences, I think, that we're going to have to deal with in the short term. And one of those things is that there's actually some research being done to predict where terrorists can attack or are going to attack next. So they're taking in data like things they call chatter, online chatter, and they're also taking into account previous attacks and where things have happened, and they're trying to feed this into an algorithm to try to predict where a new attack might occur. Nothing wrong with that per se, but then you also have research being done on autonomizing weapons. Right, you're taking things like drones and giving them this algorithm that allows them to possibly fire on their own. What worries me more than this Terminator-like thing is, what happens if we start mixing these things together that can predict where a potential problem is, and then potentially fire upon that thing. We've seen some unrest here, even in the United States in the last year, where crowds have gotten out of control and there's been issues. What are the checks and balances going to need to be with these things that they don't see our own soil as this issue that needs to be taken care of? I think we have more problem there than this artificial general intelligence like a Terminator that's going to run around and be smarter than us.
That makes a lot of sense because, how many times during the Cold War did we almost face nuclear disaster? I read not too long ago about some Russian soldiers that their new equipment told them that America had fired on Russia, and their orders were, when they see that America had fired, to return, nuclear strike back. And if they had not had the human, I'm not going to do this because I think the system might be wrong, the world probably would have ended before any of us were born.
Yeah, absolutely. It's these unintended consequences that I fear more. I'll give you one more example real quick. Target, the big box store, had an issue where there was a dad that went into the mailbox and he got a bunch of mail that had his daughter's name on it. And one of the pieces of mail from Target was advertising baby items to the daughter.
Yeah, I saw this.
Yeah, so Dad calls Target and he tells them, we've got a problem. You're sending my daughter, she's only a teenager, these things about buying baby stuff and car seats. And he's like, you're going to put this in her head that she needs to have a baby. And Target's response was, well, she's probably already pregnant. And what had happened is she had, through her behaviors of buying things, had triggered this machine learning algorithm into identifying her as being pregnant, and it was correct. So Target knew before the dad did that the teenage daughter was pregnant. So this is super creepy, right?
Yeah.
If you buy pickle chips and Rocky Road ice cream at the same time, it's pretty obvious. Do you really need machine learning to get that?
I would love if those were the identifiers.
Yeah.
So, there's another scenario here as well, and that's, where do we draw the line with our data collection? And let's think about anonymized data as well. So I think it was Yahoo a few years ago put out some anonymized data, and they're like, look, it's anonymized. You can't figure out who was searching these terms. So a private investigator took up the challenge. And what he did is he went out and he found some of the people based on the search criteria, which they said couldn't be done. And one of the oddities that stuck out was this search that kept coming up about killing your wife and how to cover up a murder and all this, all this very dark stuff that, this investigator was at first worried that somebody was actually going to act on this stuff and kill their wife. So he goes and finds the person, and it turns out the guy was a writer for the show CSI.
Yep.
Right. I knew something like that was coming. That's I have a friend that does mystery novels, and we've joked about our search history because when I was we used to work together before I went to med school, and so we both had really weird search histories from just me in school and her researching novels that were yeah, if somebody looked at our search history, they would wonder.
So you have this human condition where you're looking at a lot of data, and you have to have a line that you draw. Where does the benefit outweigh our need for privacy, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have it anonymized, but then in the same token, how good is anonymous data if a person can reverse engineer it? And if a person can do it in weeks, then could an AI or machine learning algorithm do the same thing in minutes or seconds? So you kind of have this catch-22 or this loop that's kind of self-sustaining here, and it's really hard to weigh it out. But there's really some cool benefits to all this stuff as well, because you can record health data and try to predict people's illnesses. One of the things the company I work for, Progress, we bought a machine learning company earlier this year. They teamed up with Jaguar, and they're running analytics against the engine data. And what they're looking for is anomalies in the data that might identify something going wrong with the engine. So it can be taken into a mechanic and examined further by a human being to determine if there's actually something that could break down the line. So it's preventing you from being broken down by the side of the road by looking at the engine and saying, okay, something's out of spec here. So it's able to identify some things like that. So there is some benefit to this stuff.
That's really cool. I mean, you got the check engine light that comes on, and anyone that watches Big Bang Theory knows that the way to get around that is just to put a piece of tape over it. But, and it seems like at some point you may be able to have your car call and make an appointment with your mechanic for you.
Oh, absolutely. Those days are here now. So, these algorithms that I'm talking about that our company worked on it will identify what normal behavior is. And instead of identifying the actual anomalies or the actual problems themselves, what we look at is the known good data. And if it's outside of that known good data, then it's a flag for something to be looked at. So we can ahead of time say, something may break down because some of these numbers aren't jiving with what's known as good data. And we can send an email to the owner and say, hey, take this into the shop and set up an appointment and all that. And, through things like bots, like you said, we can automate that process as well.
Yeah.
So this has me wondering, the third thing that you mentioned was augmented reality, and you're kind of talking about working on cars and things like that. And I'm wondering, how the augmented reality is going to affect the mechanic's job. Or one thing that I thought was really interesting was when Google Glass came out, you could submit ideas to them for them to send you a beta version or whatever. And one thing that I submitted was for learning and teaching in medical school. And so,
so the reason, I think these three technologies go together, we have big data, we have our storage, right? And then we have machine learning and AI. Like the machine learning it's doing the processing, right? It's taking the data, it's doing something with it, making some kind of intelligence out of it. And now the only thing that's missing from this equation for me as a web developer is I look at this and I say, big data is our model, and machine learning is kind of like a controller. So all that's missing is a view, right? Model, view, controller. And I'm like, if we're able to see these processes, with vision, then that would be the ideal situation, right? You have this massive data collection, and then you have a brain to process it, a controller to process it, and then this augmented reality to visualize it. So we have model, view, controller, right, on a large scale. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can do when we start applying these things together. And like you're saying, there's a lot of potential for this stuff in the mechanical and engineering space, in healthcare, and a lot of these technologies that are used in augmented reality today, they kind of came out of that 1950s era as well. So, for example, In 1958, the world's first heads-up display was put in operational service. And I'm sure, like, when I came up with this model view controller scenario a few minutes ago, some people snickered. You know, again, human condition, right? Let's judge something that's being talked about, and that's fine. You know, we do this all the time, and good things come out of, you know, judging people's ideas. But in 1958, when somebody said, let's put a heads-up display on an aircraft and use it to target other airplanes, it was almost laughed out of operation. But we all know how that turned out, right? I'm sure everybody that's listening has seen the movie Top Gun, or at least heard of it. So we all know that the heads-up display was pretty much a hit after the 1950s.
Mm-hmm. So when am I going to get my holodeck?
So there's actually some really cool stuff that's in the pipeline now. So let's talk about like current AR technology. Like let's rewind back just a couple years, because this is really like an accelerated timeline here. We've had like some really simple stuff come out, and then it's just advanced like extremely quick. So a couple years ago, a few of us, I think there's maybe 5 of us, owned this device called a Windows Phone, right?
Yeah.
One of the really cool apps on the Windows phone.
I think it was the same 5 people that are on Google+.
Yeah.
Possibly 3 of us are talking right now. I had one, I don't know about you. I think 3 of the 5 may be having conversation at this moment.
I actually had a Pocket PC back in the day, which is even worse.
So one of the apps that came on the Nokia phone had this kind of like overlay thing where you'd hold the phone up and like look down the street, and it would overlay like what businesses were in your view, and it would have these little black like pop-up type things that would come up over the storefronts and tell you what they were and the star ratings and, you know, stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really cool, and I thought it was really awesome till I tried to use it and figured out that there was a little bit of a flaw to it, and that was sometimes you'd hold it up and the little pop-up things would cover the signage over the building. You wouldn't be able to tell where it actually was until you put the phone down and actually looked for yourself and went, oh, I'm standing in front of it. This stupid little thing's blocking the view. But it was a really cool idea. Like, it's taking, you know, GPS data and it's overlaying it, and then it's taking, you know, data from, I would assume Bing, since it's a Microsoft thing, and putting ratings up over the top of it as well. And so really cool stuff. And then, you know, that's kind of a human condition as well, where we come up with these cool ideas. They don't quite pan out perfectly well. I think another good example was the Google Glass, right? For all intents and purposes, you could consider it a failure or a success. I mean, it never did go commercial, at least as far as I know. And, you know, it had success in the fact that it broke new ground, I think. I'll be honest, I was really excited about it because I thought it would be really cool to have that little heads-up display on a pair. Like, I wanted to put it on real glasses. I wear glasses when I'm not wearing contacts, and have that little heads-up display so I could look up information while I was sitting talking to somebody. And mind you, I was in medical school when it came out, so I was thinking, oh, this would be awesome to be able to, you know, talk about something, you know, and have it pop up the list of symptoms, and I could just scroll down and look at my notes on, oh, this is what the patient most likely has. Here's the various treatments for it, and all that stuff without having to pull out, I actually had an iPad at that point in time, but without having to pull out my iPad or a book and look it up in the book. Yeah, I think it was really a success in the fact that it broke new ground into what computing devices could be in the future. And it gave us a glimpse into, you know, the fact that everything isn't a phone or a tablet or a PC, and there's going to be new ways to interact with data. And it also pushed the human condition as well. Like I said very early on, like the glass hole thing, like it was socially awkward, right? Having this thing on your face all the time that's constantly or potentially constantly recording video and audio and pictures creeped a lot of people out. So it also kind of broke some ground there.
Yeah.
That's where I was like, I wish they had done it more to look like a pair of glasses. I mean, if anything, you would have looked like a hipster for having, the cosmetic glasses, but it would have looked better than just this one little thing covering your eye.
But, the expectations have changed. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you would have never seen people at the dinner table where the entire family was on their phones. And now that's pretty common. Like you can't go to a restaurant where you don't see that. So, I mean, I think the needle gets moved over time.
That's absolutely
it's an interesting point because I think one of the things I really enjoy about doing trivia with my friends is that we're not allowed to have our phones out. So between questions, we actually have to have a conversation. People aren't just sitting there looking at their phones the whole time.
Yeah.
So we kind of graduated from this, lame Nokia phone, augmented reality to something like Google Glass. It was kind of outside the box. And then we also have more device-based stuff that's coming around now, like ARKit from Apple and ARCore from Google. And then there's the real, cool device on the block, and that is the HoloLens. Like, this is like the pinnacle piece of this type of technology. And that's, coming back to your holodeck you're asking for. This is about as close as we're going to get for a while, I think, but it's pretty damn close, right? I don't know if you guys have had a chance to try this thing out, but it's pretty amazing. There's, again, haters out there that are going to hate, and they're talking about something that was so much an idea of science fiction just pretty much yesterday, trying to throw heat on it and downplay it, how phenomenal this thing is kind of awkward to me. I don't quite know why.
So my thought is anyone that wants to hate on the Oculus Rift or the HoloLens or anything like that, I want to let them play my old Virtual Boy and be like, this is where we were when I was a kid. This is where we are when I'm an adult kid.
Yeah.
So the HoloLens has something on it that's pretty amazing, and that is a custom piece of silicon that is an AI processor. So this headset that you're wearing has a custom piece of a custom processor that Microsoft created, and it processes all of the spatial data. And it's there because there was no way to do this through software efficiently. And it takes all the spatial data and crunches it through a machine learning program to do the location-based stuff that it does. The ability to take a hologram and place it on a table in front of you and have it sitting on the table and not occluding through it and odd stuff like that is thanks to this array of sensors that feeds this machine learning-based processor that they've created. I mean, that is a pretty amazing piece of engineering to be hating on. So I think it's one of those devices that's pretty groundbreaking, and this is the first glimpse of what the future has to hold. And to not play down the HoloLens at all, there's some really cool stuff in the device-based AR as well. So Google has a really cool app called Google Translate. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have played with that at all, but
yes, a lot.
That's another one of these that proves the idea of this model view controller scenario, where you have this big repository of data, which is language and signage and things like that, and you're using machine learning to take signage and translate it in real time, and then using the augmented reality aspect of the application to take the signage and overlay the translated version of that sign upon itself. So, for example, if you have a stop sign in another language and you pull out your phone and look at the stop sign through your phone, in real time, it will erase the sign and then print back over it in your native language the word stop. So, I mean, that is just phenomenal. That's science fiction yesterday. That's reality today.
That is really awesome, and I just think where we are now is so amazing compared to, like, I remember being a kid watching Star Trek and having them bring these basically tablets, and Star Trek The Next Generation, I should say, bringing these tablets to the officers to sign off on reports and to look at things and thinking, I want that really, really. That's just so cool. And you know what? Laying right beside my bed on the nightstand, I have a Kindle and I have an iPad mini.
Yeah,
I have the technology that I wanted as a kid.
Another Star Trek technology that's coming true is the tricorder. Mm-hmm. Google demoed something a couple weeks ago, and this, again, it's in the augmented reality space, but I don't know if it fits the actual technical definition because it's not visual, it's auditory. So what is a pair of headphones that can do real-time speech translation? I mean, how bizarre is that? Like,
that is wild.
I'd like to go back to like my 8th grade Spanish teacher and go, see, I told you I didn't need this class.
They're calling it Babelfish. Just like drop it down your ear.
I mean, it's amazing that we're able to do stuff like this. But, you know, we see that stuff coming around today. And if you look at, you know, what was science fiction 50 years ago, and, you know, these ideas were there. We had the ideas where we knew that these things could potentially be created, but we just didn't have the technology. It needed to catch up. Now the technology is catching up, and it's been, you know, 50, 60 years since these ideas have come about, and now we're seeing them on store shelves. Mm-hmm. So what does the next 60 years look like? If you can abstract or extrapolate from, you know, 50s to today, then what will 50 years from today look like? And that's where things get really, really strange. You know, if you think about the HoloLens, for example, this is the first generation of this device. What is generation 60 years from now going to look like? Is it going to be part of your body? Is it going to be, you know, in a pair of glasses? Will it be in a contact? Will it be implanted? And what type of implications does that stuff bring? You know, there's theories about the fourth dimension. You know, one of those is that the fourth dimension is the ability for multiple three-dimensional spaces to occupy the same space. So if you have these technologies that are built into your vision, you could potentially have a virtual fourth dimension where, you know, you're in a 3D space with other people, but you're all occupying a different version of that space. So the three of us could be sitting together at a conference, and one of us might be watching the, you know, Super Bowl instead or something like that. And we're all experiencing something completely different, but we're all sharing the same space together.
Sort of like, have you read Ready Player One?
I have not.
Oh, you should definitely read the book before the movie comes out. I'm excited for the movie, but definitely read the book. It is phenomenal. But it's basically about the kind of augmented or actually virtual reality world, and people go to school in virtual reality. And so they sit at home or in a classroom or something like that with a whole VR suit on and learn, and then, you know, they have their activities and stuff on these virtual reality worlds.
If you want to see a game that is very futuristic, find somebody with a HoloLens and try out this game called Fragments. So it's kind of like a CSI video game, and it will literally draw like somebody else's apartment over your own living room, like walls and floor, and characters, you know, end up in that space, and it's kind of this very seamless blending of two different worlds together in the same space. It's really bizarre to see, and it's actually something that exists today. It's really mind-blowing.
Can I make it NCIS? Because I kind of got a thing for Abby.
And that's another thing too. I mean, that's another human condition that we probably need to address as well. Like if we have all these things on our face and we have this ability to kind of check out to a different reality, we already have this issue where you might be sitting at dinner with your family or something, and like I think it was Will that said it, you're all on your phones. If you have something that's even more transparent, less obvious rather, you're all sitting with glasses on. Who's to say I'm not paying attention to what everybody's doing and I'm off on my own, my own little virtual reality doing something else, even though we're all kind of trying to sit here and share dinner together, right? So that's kind of a human condition we have to deal with. Like, how socially acceptable is it going to be to have these devices on if they're not already part of us? And then, how do you sit in the bedroom at night when your wife's like, and mine already is like, get off of Twitter, It's time to watch TV. And what if you have this thing on your face? I'm sure she wouldn't be too happy with me having like a Google Glass or a HoloLens strapped to my face while I'm in her room at night. It's kind of unsettling.
I think the ultimate result is that the seam between us and the machines is getting thinner all the time, and we're having to learn how to deal with that, because at some point, it's the machines are going to be interacting in addition to just us, and it may not even be us. Like we'll have digital agents doing things for us. Like I could foresee 50 years in the future that most of the advertising is written for bots, because bots will be doing the shopping.
Let's examine that a little bit further down the road. Like let's talk about that 50 years from now. So right now we have like pre-programmed assistants like Siri and Alexa and things like that. But right now we have this concept that people talk about, like uploading your consciousness and things like that. But this is a concept that's coming out of a generation that hasn't had a lifetime of data collection, right? So take, for example, a child that's being born, 10, 20 years from now. They're going to have data collected on them since conception pretty much. And, over their lifetime, you're going to collect everything about that person, their health statistics, every like and dislike they've ever had on social media. All of these things, all these wearables that we have now, we're going to have even more of in the future. So we're collecting just limitless amounts of data on a person from cradle to grave, right? So this concept of having to upload your consciousness seems to me like this idea of thinking of tomorrow in today's context. Like, who says we're going to have to upload our consciousness? If we're collecting so much data on ourselves, do we really have to upload something to be able to simulate consciousness? So today we have, these pre-programmed things like Siri and whatnot. In the future, we may have digital assistants that are just people's consciousness kind of simulated from data collection. In theory, you could use all of this data that you're collecting over a lifetime to power, a Twitter bot or any other type of bot that would have a similar sense of taste on things that you might like or dislike, and reply in a similar manner that you might reply. Just depends on how good the data collection was and how good the machine learning algorithm is.
Yeah.
So that's got its own creep factor to it. And, I've kind of mentioned this before, I've given this talk a few times, and the way people respond to that is always vastly different from one to the next. People are kind of creeped out by the fact that we might be able to live on in this virtual simulation type of scenario where this bot is mimicking our behaviors. But then I got the response one time that this would have been a tremendous help for somebody that was dealing with a family member that had Alzheimer's disease. So they said, if we had the ability to store all of this data and then make rational decisions based on it when this person was going through this Alzheimer's phase of their life, it may have been able to help us get an idea of things that they may have wanted, for dinner, whether they would have liked to have, gone certain places or seen certain shows or things like that. It could have made recommendations to help just kind of ease everybody through the process. I thought that was really interesting.
That makes a lot of sense, going back to what we've been talking about a lot here with the human condition. One thing I noticed, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and just sort of watching my mom and aunts and uncles deal with that and deal with her as she was going through that. It was basically their perception of what she would want. Mm-hmm. So it was what they thought she would want is what they were trying to provide her, and they weren't always right. And I think something like what you're talking about would have really helped them to understand what she really wanted and what she really liked, because, human condition, things like that, we go over to a family member's house and they cook us food. It's not very good. Well, I'm not going to be rude. Well, I am, but most of my family's not going to be rude and be like, I don't like this. Quick example, my mom makes a dish that I absolutely love. It's a Ritzy chicken casserole, if anyone wants to know. It's phenomenal. Went to visit my sister. She was trying to be, hey, I'm going to make you your favorite dish. You're here visiting me. It's really awesome. Well, instead of using sour cream, she's like, I'm also going to be healthy because I know you're trying to lose weight and be healthy, and I'm going to use Greek yogurt. Yeah. No.
Not so much, huh?
And, it was one of those things, like, if I had said, oh, hey, this is great, thank you, she'd continue making it because she wouldn't know I didn't like it. Or I could take the hit, she'd be mad at me for an hour, and just be like, hey, I really appreciate it, but it doesn't really taste as good with the Greek yogurt. I took the hit because I'm like, I don't want to have to suffer through this again.
Wow.
Her husband gave me a mean look. The sister I'm talking about, Will. Yeah. And she didn't get upset. She's like, you're right, it tastes like crap. She's like, that was an experiment, and it was a bad experiment. And I'm like, wait, what? Who are you, and what did you do with my sister? Because I'm expecting this explosion, and she handled it like really well. But still, it's one of those things where people trying not to hurt others' feelings can lead to false assumptions. Whereas if we had what you were talking about, when they're in a situation like that, and I guess it kind of hits close to home for me because of having family members that had Alzheimer's, where it's like, yeah, I could have seen that really saving a lot of stress and heartache for my family had we had that.
You probably shouldn't have flipped that casserole dish, though.
Yeah, probably not. Well, hey, this is some really fascinating and a little bit scary, a little bit really cool kind of stuff. Having been science fiction geeks our whole lives, we've seen some of the things that were only in the movies or only in TV become reality. And we're looking forward not only to what else will come to exist, but also what the future of science fiction holds. Ed, we really want to thank you for sharing this with us again. It means a lot to us that you're willing to spend another hour or so talking to us about it. That's really awesome. We really want to thank you. Y'all can check out Ed's podcast, Eat, Sleep, Code, on this website, or I'm assuming it's on a lot of the podcatchers, iTunes, stuff like that.
Yeah, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Channel 9, or you can go to the website developer.telerik.com and click on podcast there.
All right, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. How else can people get in touch with you?
So I'm frequently on Twitter. You can find me at Ed Charbeneau by my name. It's difficult to spell, but it's CHARBENEAU. You can find me on there. You can find me at EdCharbeneau.com and Telerik.com as well. I do a lot of work for them because that's my employer, but I do webinars and a lot of writing. So you'll find me at developer.telerik.com, writing a lot. And I'm just about going to conferences and talking to people in the community. So you may actually see me throughout the U.S. Some part of the year or another. I make some rounds quite frequently. So if you're in the Seattle area or through the Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky area, I'm in those areas a lot.
Cool.
Well, definitely, guys, if you ever have the chance, go see Ed talk. Ed, if you're ever up in Cleveland, Ohio, let me know. I'll try to make a trip up there because that's where my sister lives and they like me to visit. So
I was going to say, can I try some of that casserole?
There you go. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I know a lot of people probably noticed I didn't talk too much during this episode, and that's because I'm in a great deal of pain. Where I had the hernia incision, it's really hurting a lot, and I'm nauseated. And I want to stress the importance of planning for situations where you're not on point and you're not completely well. That's been something really important over the last week that I've found all the gaps in my planning. Fortunately, with this podcast, Beej and I had planned ahead just in case I was a little bit too sick, and basically decided that I would try to be on, but not talk too much if I was not doing well. And so that's basically what I did. And I want to encourage everybody out there to think about what happens when you're tired, you're sick, you're out of work, that sort of thing, and try to mitigate things before that happens, just to make it easier on your coworkers and everybody else. I think a lot of developers don't really do a good job of this. I know plenty of them that when they get sick, somebody has to call them and ask for their password to get on their machine and ask where stuff is because they didn't plan ahead. Try not to do that. Try to be a grown-up. And that's all I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up for weekly emails with extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Look for us each week on Facebook Live before we record each episode. Thanks for listening. See you next time.